You know that feeling when you meet someone and everything just kind of clicks?
Oh, absolutely. It's intoxicating.
Right. You're sitting across a small table, maybe this really crowded coffee shop, and the ambient noise just completely fades away. You lean forward, and then a second later, they lean forward.
Yeah, the classic mirroring.
Exactly. You rest your chin on your hand, they do the exact same thing. Their vocal tone drops to match yours. Even the cadence of their breathing seems to, like, synchronize with your own. It feels completely organic.
It feels like magic, honestly.
It does. You get this instant, undeniable rush of serendipity. You're sitting there thinking to yourself, I have found my person. We are on the exact same wavelength.
Oh, I mean, we are hardwired to crave that feeling. Human beings are just deeply biologically comforted by that profound sense of alignment.
We want it to be this mystical occurrence, right?
Yeah, we really do. Because when someone physically and emotionally reflects us, our brain registers it as profound safety. It's ultimate validation. But as a clinical psychologist and behavioral scientist, I have to be the bearer of bad news here.
And as your host today, I can tell you that the bad news is actually fascinating. Because when you start tearing through the actual behavioral science and the neurobiology behind that quote-unquote magical interaction, the illusion just completely shatters.
It really does. The machinery running beneath that feeling of a soulmate connection is infinitely more complex. And honestly, it can be occasionally heartbreaking or even actively terrifying, depending on who is sitting across that table from you.
Because what looks like a soulmate connection on the surface might actually be a disguise.
Exactly. The clinical reality is that human mirroring is the ultimate behavioral disguise. What feels like destined alignment could be driven by completely divergent, entirely unseen psychological engines.
Right. Because the physical behavior is the same. The crossing of the legs, the mirroring of your smile, matching your energy, it looks utterly identical in every scenario.
It's identical, but the underlying engine could be anything from a desperate cry for survival all the way to a highly calibrated predatory tactic.
And that is exactly our mission for you, the listener, in this deep dive. We are taking an enormous stack of research today, ranging from behavioral science experiments at the Max Planck Institute to these sprawling neuroimaging studies mapping the dark triad of personality traits, all the way to clinical trauma guidelines.
It's a massive amount of data, but it paints such a clear picture.
It really does. We're going to deconstruct the hidden mechanisms behind why people reflect your behavior. When that person sitting across from you is mirroring your every move, we want you to know the truth.
Right. Are they doing it out of an innate, healthy biological empathy? Or are they drowning in a fragmented identity and just using you as a psychological life raft?
Or, and this is the really scary part, are you walking blindly into a meticulously crafted psychological trap?
Well, to decipher what is actually happening in those moments, we first have to establish the biological baseline.
Like how it works in a healthy brain.
Exactly. Before we can understand how mirroring is weaponized in a toxic dynamic, or how it's utilized as camouflage by neurodivergent individuals, we need to strip it down to its most primitive function.
Which brings us to a phenomenon from the behavioral science literature called the chameleon effect. And the wildest part of this research, to me anyway, is that you have likely done this 50 times today without ever realizing it.
Oh, at least 50 times. Tanya Chartrand and John Barg ran this really fascinating set of experiments back in 1999 that just blew the lid off how automatic this is.
What did they actually do in the room?
So they put participants in a room with strangers, but the strangers were actually Confederates, actors working for the researchers. And during casual conversation, these actors would subtly introduce specific physical behaviors.
Like what kind of behaviors?
One might periodically rub their face, another actor might bounce their foot, just normal, subtle movements.
And the participants just started copying them blindly.
Completely blindly.
Yeah.
The participants who interacted with the face-rubbing stranger, they just started rubbing their own faces. The ones with the foot-tapping stranger started tapping their feet.
Wow.
And here's the kicker. When they were interviewed later, not a single participant consciously registered that the stranger was doing these things.
Let alone that they were copying them.
Right. It happens entirely below the threshold of conscious awareness.
It's almost like an invisible tether connects two nervous systems the exact moment they enter the same room.
Oh.
But, why would our bodies dedicate computing power to doing this automatically?
Well, it comes down to an evolutionary survival mechanism. It's known as the perception-behavior link.
Oh, break that down for us.
Our brains possess what neuroscientists call a shared coding system, meaning the neural architecture you use to perceive an action being performed by someone else is intertwined with the exact same neural architecture you use to physically execute that action yourself.
So simply watching someone cross their arms fires the same microscopic wires in my brain that would tell my own arms to fold.
That is exactly it. That is the function of our mirror neuron system. And if we trace this back to our evolutionary past, being out of sync with your tribe meant isolation.
And on the prehistoric savanna, isolation is an immediate death sentence.
Right. Mimicking meant affiliation. It unconsciously communicated, I am like you, I'm part of this group. We can cooperate to find food and fight off threats.
The individuals who were best at unconsciously syncing their physical movements were the ones who survived.
They survived, and they passed on those genes to us.
Now, here's the finding from the Max Planck research that completely flipped my understanding of human connection. Because we always assume the order of operations is, I like you, and therefore my body naturally syncs up with yours.
Yeah, that's the cultural assumption.
But the causality is actually reversed.
It is a profound hidden truth about human psychology. Mimicry doesn't just reflect empathy, it actively manufactures it.
That is so wild to me. It manufactures it.
It does. In those 1999 experiments, the researchers had some of the actors deliberately mirror the natural body language of the participants, while others just kept their body language totally neutral.
And what happened?
The participants consistently reported liking the actors who mirrored them significantly more. They rated them as highly trustworthy, highly persuasive, all because of posture.
Because when we physically adopt someone else's posture, we force our own nervous system to simulate their physical state, which gives us a backdoor into their emotional state.
Exactly.
It's like a flock of birds shifting direction in the sky at the exact same millisecond. There was no leader shouting orders. It's just this automatic biological resonance.
And we are hardwired to respond favorably to that resonance. Psychologists refer to this as the similar to me effect. We feel deeply safe with people who act like us.
But, that very feeling of safety introduces a massive vulnerability in our psychological armor.
It's a huge vulnerability.
If trust and empathy can be instantly manufactured by a biological reflex, then that reflex can be hacked.
Precisely. This pro-social biological hack, which evolved just to keep us safe in tribes, is wide open to exploitation.
So what happens when it gets into the wrong hands?
When this system is hijacked by individuals possessing dark triad traits, mirroring ceases to be an organic social glue. It becomes a highly calibrated weapon of seduction and emotional subjugation.
And that plunges us into the darkest application of this behavior. We are moving from the subconscious chameleon effect into the territory of pathological manipulation.
Right, entering the realm of narcissistic personality disorder.
Exactly. Let's look at MPD. When someone with covert or overt narcissism sits across from you on a date, what is actually happening when they mirror your behavior?
Well, the clinical term for the initial phase of this dynamic is love bombing. And culturally, we tend to throw that phrase around to describe someone who is just overly enthusiastic or maybe buys too many flowers.
Right, like, oh, he texted me 3 times today, he's love bombing me.
Exactly. But the clinical reality is far more insidious. Love bombing is a concentrated inundation of excessive affection, intense flattery, and rapid future faking.
Future faking, meaning they are planning a life together within weeks of meeting.
Yes, they are painting a picture of your shared destiny almost immediately.
But the research highlights that this affection is actually a Trojan horse. They aren't just gazing deeply into your eyes because they are swept away by romance. They are running an interrogation.
They are gathering data. That is the key. During the idealization phase, the narcissist is meticulously studying you. They are taking notes on your core values, your hobbies, your unmet childhood needs, and your deepest traumas.
So you might share a story about an emotionally unavailable parent, right?
Right. You share that vulnerability, and suddenly they manufacture a scenario where they display this fierce, protective loyalty. They give you the exact emotional rescue you have subconsciously craved your entire life.
Wow. They take all of this gathered data and reflect it back to you perfectly.
Exactly. They're essentially building a bespoke algorithm designed to make you feel like you are finally truly understood.
But to understand the danger of this, we really have to look at the emotional void driving the behavior.
Yeah.
Because the biggest misconception about narcissism is that it comes from an excess of self-love.
That is the biggest myth out there. Pathological narcissism has absolutely nothing to do with self-love. It is rooted in a profound, all-consuming terror of being an undesired self.
An undesired self.
Yes. Individuals with severe NPD lack a stable, continuous identity. Their core self-esteem is incredibly fragile, often hollowed out by early developmental trauma or highly inconsistent attachment in childhood.
So they are essentially an empty vessel.
They are an empty vessel that is terrified of its own emptiness.
Man, that explains so much.
Right. To protect that fragile core from completely collapsing, they construct what psychologists call a grandiose false self.
And that false self needs fuel.
Constant fuel. It is a defensive fantasy that requires an unending stream of external validation, admiration, and control to sustain itself. We call this fuel narcissistic supply.
So the mirroring is literally a survival mechanism for their false self. They steal your best traits, your passions, your empathy, and they wear them like a costume to secure your devotion.
Yes, they mirror you to secure the supply.
And once you are hooked, the dynamic violently shifts.
It's a whiplash. Once your guard is completely down and you are emotionally dependent on this illusion of a soulmate, the idealization phase abruptly ends.
It just drops off a cliff.
The narcissist switches to devaluation and ultimately discard.
The physiological impact this has on the victim is staggering. The research shows that the victim's internal reward system is completely hijacked.
Oh, the neurochemistry is chaotic.
The love bombing phase spikes your brain with unprecedented levels of dopamine and oxytocin. It literally mimics the neurochemical pathways of a substance addiction.
It is an addiction.
So when the devaluation suddenly hits, when this perfect partner suddenly becomes cold, critical, and dismissive, the victim goes into literal chemical withdrawal.
You experience intense cognitive dissonance. You are looking at a person who treated you like absolute royalty yesterday, and today they are gaslighting your reality.
And your brain just cannot reconcile the two images.
It can't. So you scramble to fix the relationship, believing that if you just love them harder, the soulmate will return.
But the literature introduces a concept here that completely stopped me in my tracks. It's called self-verification theory. And it explains the darkest paradox of why victims stay during the abuse phase.
It is a dark paradox. We operate under the assumption that human beings only want to be around people who flatter them, who build them up.
Right, that makes logical sense.
But self-verification theory reveals that on a subconscious level, we have an overwhelming drive for others to confirm our existing beliefs about ourselves, even if those beliefs are incredibly negative.
Wow. So how does the narcissist weaponize this during the devaluation phase?
Well, remember that during the data gathering phase, they didn't just learn your hopes and dreams. They learned your deepest insecurities.
They learned exactly what makes you feel worthless.
Exactly. During devaluation, the narcissist stops mirroring your positive traits, and they begin perfectly mirroring your hidden negative beliefs about yourself.
So if deep down, maybe because of childhood trauma, you harbor a secret fear that you are fundamentally unlovable, or maybe you're a burden, the abuser's sudden coldness and cruel criticism confirms that exact fear.
Yes. The victim remains locked in this devastating dynamic because, on a subconscious structural level, the abuser is validating their darkest insecurities.
That is chilling.
The brain registers this familiarity as a twisted form of truth. It feels like home, even if that home is burning down.
It's like someone hands you this beautifully wrapped gift, but inside is a perfectly mapped blueprint of every time you felt inadequate as a child. And somehow you hold on to it because the handwriting looks like your own.
That is a phenomenal way to put it. The victim is essentially falling in love with a holographic projection of their best self and then being tortured by a projection of their deepest shame.
Which brings up an incredibly profound question about human behavior. When an individual engages in a campaign of emotional destruction that is this calculated, this precise, are we simply looking at a moral failure? Or is there a fundamental difference in the actual neurobiological hardware of someone with this disorder?
That question takes us directly into the broken machinery of the brain. The bioobserved neuroimaging studies completely dismantle how we culturally view narcissistic behavior.
Because we aren't just talking about a bad attitude.
No, we are talking about literal structural deficits. The data here is groundbreaking. The researchers utilized advanced machine learning, specifically parallel independent component analysis and random forest models, on a cohort of 135 participants to analyze the joint contributions of gray and white matter in the brain.
Okay, for those of us who don't spend our days in neurology labs, what does it mean to use a random forest machine learning model on a brain scan? Like, why couldn't they just look at an MRI?
Good question. The human brain is infinitely too complex to just eyeball a scan and spot a personality disorder. A random forest model is a type of artificial intelligence that creates thousands of decision trees.
Okay.
It sifts through millions of microscopic data points in the neural pathways, searching for hidden patterns and structural faults that a human researcher could simply never see with the naked eye.
And what did this AI find?
It found that high levels of narcissism are physically linked to structural anomalies across a highly specific frontotemporal-parietal network. And this network heavily overlaps with the default mode network, or DMN.
The default mode network. Let's dig into that.
The DMN is the system in your brain that lights up when you are at rest. It's active when you are daydreaming, ruminating, or thinking about yourself. It is the neurological seat of your internal sense of self.
And in highly narcissistic individuals, the DMN is structurally compromised.
Yes, along with several other key regions.
Let's walk through what the AI found in these specific brain regions. Because understanding the anatomy finally explains the bizarre, cruel behaviors victims experience. I mean, how is it possible that they can just turn off their empathy in an instant?
It begins in the right anterior insula.
Okay, the right anterior insula.
In a healthy brain, the anterior insula acts as a rapid switching station for empathy. When you see someone crying, this region activates to help you map their emotional pain, and then it immediately deactivates so you can step back, regulate your own emotions, and offer comfort.
But the scans show that in narcissistic brains, there is a decreased deactivation of this region.
Exactly. They cannot flip the switch.
Yeah.
They physically struggle to transition their attention away from their own internal state to genuinely process another person's emotional reality.
Wow.
They are trapped in a state of hyper-self-focus. Natural, bottom-up emotional resonance is biologically blocked.
That explains the intense self-absorption. But what about the rage? Why do they perceive the most innocent comments as vicious personal attacks?
That brings us to the amygdala and the posterior superior temporal sulcus, or PSTS.
The amygdala is your brain's primitive threat detection center.
Yes. It's the alarm bell. And the machine learning models revealed that in narcissists, these areas are incredibly hyperreactive.
Meaning their alarm system is just way too sensitive.
Far too sensitive. Their brain will hypersensitively misread a completely neutral facial expression, or a minor sigh, as a devastating ego threat or an impending rejection.
So they are constantly perceiving vicious attacks that simply are not happening in objective reality.
Right. They feel under constant threat.
But if they feel attacked, why don't they just logically talk themselves down? Like, why do they escalate to psychological warfare? What is happening to their moral compass?
Their moral brake system is offline. The scans showed severe hypoactivation, meaning an underactive state, in the medial prefrontal cortex, the MPFC.
And the MPFC handles what exactly?
It is the command center for moral reasoning, cognitive perspective taking, and active emotional regulation.
So it's the brakes.
Exactly. When a healthy person gets angry, the MPFC steps in and says, wait, don't say that cruel thing, you'll regret it. But because the narcissist's MPFC is hypoactive, that brake system fails.
Oh, wow.
This is what allows them to execute cold, punishing, or manipulative behaviors without experiencing the natural friction of guilt or remorse.
So you have a brain that is incapable of shifting focus away from itself, constantly perceiving imaginary attacks, and completely lacking the moral brakes to stop a vicious retaliation.
It's a destructive combination.
But this brings up a massive contradiction. If their empathy center is broken, how are they so good at love bombing? Like, how do they know exactly what to say to make you fall in love with them?
This is perhaps the most crucial distinction in the entire field of cluster B personality disorders. We culturally assume narcissists have zero empathy,
Right.
but the neuroimaging confirms they actually possess highly functioning cognitive empathy while entirely lacking emotional empathy.
Meaning they know exactly what you're feeling, they can read your emotions like a textbook, but they do not care how it feels.
Precisely. And their mirror neuron system reflects this terrifying selectivity. Studies show that a narcissist's mirror neurons do light up, but only under specific conditions.
Which are?
They resonate intensely when witnessing a victim's guilt, distress, or vulnerability. But those same brain regions show significantly reduced activation when witnessing someone else's joy, pride, or success.
I mean, it's like a tactical military drone. It maps the terrain perfectly. It sees every emotional contour, every vulnerability, not to appreciate the beauty of the landscape, but to calculate the exact coordinates for a devastating strike.
That is exactly what it is doing. And because their neural hardware prevents them from internally soothing their own distress, they are forced to use the victim as an external regulator.
Wait, how does that actually look in the daily life as a relationship?
Well, because the narcissist cannot process their own internal shame or anxiety, they project intense, highly tailored exhibitions of victimhood or rage onto you. By doing this, they overstimulate your healthy empathy network.
Oh, so they offload the pain.
Exactly. They literally force the victim's nervous system to physically and emotionally carry the narcissist's distress.
You become their emotional dumping ground.
Yes.
You get spiked with cortisol and panic when you fail to soothe them, and you get a tiny addictive dopamine hit of relief when you finally please them. You are no longer a partner. You are literally an external regulatory organ for their broken brain.
It is a profound psychological violation, but as we navigate this research, it is essential to draw a very clear clinical boundary here.
What kind of boundary?
Not all intense chameleon-like mirroring comes from a place of exploitation. There is another demographic whose mirroring looks almost indistinguishable on the surface. The rapid shifts in personality, the intense attachment.
But it operates from a completely different neurobiological and emotional engine.
Completely different.
And this shifts us into a totally different realm of human suffering. Because if narcissists mirror to map a target for manipulation, why do individuals with borderline personality disorder, or BPD, engage in extreme mirroring?
For individuals battling borderline personality disorder, the chameleon effect is not a weapon. It is a desperate, chaotic life raft.
A life raft.
Yes. It is a defense mechanism deployed against an all-consuming fear of abandonment and a psychological state known as identity diffusion.
The clinical descriptions of this in the sources are really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Someone with BPD might dramatically change their core personalities depending on who is in the room.
Right. They adapt to whoever is around them.
They might completely overhaul their hobbies, their political opinions, their style of dress, even their cultural identity, just to perfectly match a new romantic partner or a new friend group.
The hidden emotional need driving this is the sheer terror of being left alone, combined with a fundamental lack of a stable internal compass. They experience severe identity disturbance.
So what does that feel like internally?
When they look inward, the hard drive feels completely blank, or it is spinning so wildly they just can't make sense of it.
So they latch onto external sources to define their own existence. They think, if I can perfectly reflect everything you love, if I become exactly like you won't have a reason to abandon me.
Exactly. But the tragedy is found in the neuroscience, because the BPD brain is essentially the perfect inverse reflection of the narcissistic brain.
Let's contrast those brain scans, because this completely changed my perspective when I read it. The narcissist has cognitive empathy, right? They understand your feelings but don't feel them. How is the borderline brain different?
The individual with BPD experiences the exact reverse. They have a hyperactive somatosensory mirror neuron system, meaning they're biologically flooded with the raw physical pain and emotional distress of everyone around them. They experience emotional contagion so intensely that if you are feeling anxious, their nervous system literally absorbs and amplifies your anxiety as if it were their own physical pain.
Wow, they are feeling everything. So why does the communication constantly break down then? Why do these relationships become so volatile if they are so full of emotional empathy?
Because the flood of raw emotional data lacks a cognitive container. The neuroimaging shows that individuals with BPD have a hypoactive right inferior frontal gyrus, or IFG.
Okay, and what role does the IFG play?
The right IFG is responsible for cognitive context, perspective taking, and mentalizing. It is the part of the brain that puts the puzzle pieces together to understand why a social interaction is happening.
I see. Imagine standing in the middle of a massive screaming crowd with no earplugs and a blindfold on. You are feeling the sheer panic, the joy, the anger of thousands of people vibrating against your skin. But because you are blindfolded, you have absolutely zero context for who is shouting or why. You don't know if they were fleeing a fire or cheering for a concert.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The borderline individuals is drowning in emotional contagion, but their hypoactive IFG strips them of the ability to interpret the intent behind the emotion.
So let's look at a real-life example. If a partner comes home from work and lets out a heavy sigh just because they had a long commute in traffic, how does the BPD brain process that?
The BPD brain absorbs the exhaustion and frustration of that sigh instantly, feeling it as a wave of intense anxiety in their own body. But because they lack the cognitive context to say, oh, my partner is just stuck in traffic, their trauma brain jumps to the most catastrophic conclusion.
Which is?
They are sighing because they are exhausted by me. They are about to leave me.
And because they cannot cognitively model their partner's cooperative intentions, they react to that perceived threat.
Yes. They rely on rigid, automatic, tit-for-tat defense strategies. They might strike out, start an intense argument, or suddenly become ice-cold to protect themselves from the excruciating pain of the abandonment they are absolutely convinced is happening.
The difference in intent here is staggering. The narcissist is a predator wearing camouflage to isolate and hunt a target. The borderline individual is more like a computer downloading someone else's operating system because its own hard drive is corrupted, and it is terrified of permanently crashing.
And this highlights a critical crisis in mental health treatment. This is exactly why BPD is so frequently misdiagnosed by lay people and even by inexperienced clinicians as covert narcissism.
Because the surface behaviors look the same.
Yes, the intense initial mirroring, the sudden devaluation, the shifting of opinions, it looks incredibly similar to the untrained eye.
But the brain scans prove unequivocally that these conditions utilize entirely different neural circuits. The narcissist lacks emotional resonance. The borderline is drowning in it.
Right. The outcome for the partner might feel similarly chaotic and exhausting, but the internal reality of the person doing the mirroring is worlds apart. We cannot treat the behavior without understanding the machinery driving it.
Which transitions us to a completely different paradigm of mirroring. We've explored mirroring for subconscious social cohesion, mirroring for calculated manipulation, and mirroring for psychological identity stabilization.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
Now, we must look at mirroring as a conscious, intellectually exhausting tool for sheer physical and social survival. We are talking about autistic masking.
And this requires a fundamental shift in how we view human interaction. When we discuss neurodivergence, specifically, autism, masking, and mirroring are not symptoms of a personality disorder.
And they're certainly not tools of exploitation.
No, absolutely not. They are highly complex compensatory survival strategies deployed by individuals forced to navigate a society built exclusively for a different neurotype.
The clinical research makes a fascinating and heartbreaking distinction between the different forms of this camouflaging. We need to separate masking, autism mirroring, and autism mimicking. Let's break down the daily reality of these strategies. What is actually happening when an autistic person masks?
Masking is the active, manual suppression of natural autistic traits. It is the autistic individual forcing themselves to maintain unbroken eye contact during a meeting, even though it feels physically burning or painfully intimate to them.
Wow.
It is the manual suppression of self-soothing behaviors like physical stimming, flapping hands, rocking, or vocalizing, simply to avoid drawing negative, judgmental attention in public.
And then there's autism mirroring, which the sources describe as an unconscious fawning response to ensure immediate safety.
Yes. In moments of high stress or social confusion, an autistic individual might unconsciously mirror the posture, tone, and vocabulary of the person they are speaking with.
But again, this isn't to manipulate.
Not at all. It is an automatic de-escalation tactic. It is a way to co-regulate and signal to the neurotypical person, I am exactly like you, I am not a threat, please do not perceive me as weird or single me out.
And finally, we have autism mimicking. And reading the research on this, the sheer intellectual computing power required to do this every single day is staggering.
It really is. Mimicking is highly deliberate and conscious. The autistic individual essentially becomes an anthropologist studying an alien culture.
How they do that?
They actively analyze human interactions, breaking down social scripts, analyzing the exact timing of neurotypical laughter, the acceptable volume for small talk. They often learn these scripts by obsessively watching TV shows, films, or studying popular peers.
And then they rehearse these scripts to pass as neurotypical in social or workplace environments.
Exactly.
They aren't just having a conversation. They are reciting lines in a play they didn't write. The hidden emotional need here is heartbreakingly pragmatic.
It is purely about survival. The hidden need is to avoid bullying on the playground. It is to avoid negative judgment in the grocery store. It is to pass a job interview in a world that arbitrarily screens out atypical body language. It is to escape systemic workplace discrimination.
The toll this takes on the individual is devastating. Earlier, we talked about the chameleon effect being this effortless automatic background process for neurotypical people.
Right, the lizard doesn't know it's chameleon.
Exactly. But for an autistic individual, masking is like having to manually beat your own heart while also trying to keep 20 spinning plates in the air, all while doing advanced calculus in a foreign language. Every single social interaction requires active computation.
The cognitive load is immense, and the statistics reflecting this are a public health crisis. According to the research, 8 in 10 autistic people will experience severe mental health issues in their lifetime, compared to roughly 1 in 4 in the general population.
8 in 10, that's unacceptable.
It is, and chronic masking is the highest single predictor of a devastating phenomenon known as autistic burnout.
How does autistic burnout differ from, regular career burnout?
It is a complete collapse of the central nervous system. Autistic burnout is characterized by chronic, bone-deep exhaustion, a drastically reduced tolerance to sensory stimulus where standard lights or sounds become physically painful, and a terrifying loss of acquired skills.
A loss of skills, like what?
Individuals who have masked successfully for decades, holding down high-pressure jobs, may suddenly wake up unable to speak, unable to leave their bed, or unable to process basic daily tasks because their nervous system has finally shattered under the weight of the performance.
The sources also point out a terrifying correlation between this chronic masking, burnout, and suicidality. You read firsthand accounts of people describing masking as a fundamental self-betrayal.
Yeah, that's exactly how it feels to them.
They feel like they've lost any connection to who they truly are because they've spent 30 years burying their actual personality to make neurotypical people comfortable.
And here is the ultimate tragic psychological paradox of autistic masking. The research indicates that it doesn't even work as intended.
What do you mean it doesn't work? If there's a passing the job interview, isn't the mask functioning?
Only superficially. Studies show that even when an autistic individual is masking with incredible skill, suppressing their stims, forcing the eye contact, using the perfectly rehearsed scripts, non-autistic people still judge them harshly in thin-sliced social interactions.
But why? If the behavior looks normal, what is the neurotypical brain reacting to?
The neurotypical unconscious bias detects that something is highly calculated or slightly out of rhythm. It's an uncanny valley effect.
Ah, the uncanny valley.
Yes. They sense the cognitive effort behind the performance, even if they can't articulate what feels off. So the neurotypical person instinctively pulls away, labeling the autistic person as aloof, untrustworthy, or awkward.
That is absolutely devastating. The autistic person is completely burning themselves to the ground, destroying their central nervous system to perform for a neurotypical audience that ultimately still rejects them because the underlying neurodivergence is unconsciously sensed anyway.
It is a cycle of immense suffering, and it requires a hard look at our societal structures.
It raises an incredibly important question about our cultural hypocrisy. We sit around and tell people to be authentic, to bring your whole self to work, to just be yourself. But society actively, demonstrably punishes neurodivergent people the exact second they stop performing.
That is the crux of the issue. We pathologize atypical communication. We frame it as a deficit in the autistic person that needs to be, quote-unquote, fixed or hidden, rather than recognizing that society's rigid, unyielding demand for neurotypical conformity is what forces the mask onto them in the first place.
We aren't just observing their burnout, we are demanding it. We are forcing an entire demographic of human beings to hold up a mirror to us, simply so we don't have to feel the momentary discomfort of interacting with someone whose brain operates on a different frequency.
Exactly. When we lack awareness and genuine acceptance, we force them to mirror us just to survive.
We have covered a massive amount of psychological terrain today. We have completely deconstructed the psychology of the mirror. When someone sitting across from you reflects your behavior, matches your tone, and aligns with your energy, the surface image looks exactly the same. But underneath that reflection, the machinery is running on entirely different tracks.
It could be the natural, evolutionary social glue of the chameleon effect, silently building trust through the ancient pathways of our mirror neurons.
Or it could be the chilling, calculated weapon of a narcissist's default mode network and hyper-reactive amygdala, gathering bespoke data to trap you in a cycle of chemical induction and abuse.
It could be the chaotic life raft of someone battling borderline identity diffusion, drowning in an ocean of raw emotional contagion without a cognitive compass to guide them to safety.
Or it could be the exhausting, intellectually manual survival camouflage of an autistic mind, burning its own nervous system to the ground just to exist safely in the room with you.
Understanding why someone is reflecting you is not just an academic exercise. It is the master key to protecting your own psychological reality. Knowledge is only powerful when it gives you a new lens through which to view human behavior.
It is how you learn to spot the red flags of love bombing, recognizing when someone is gathering data rather than building a genuine connection long before the trap closes.
It's how you learn to set rigid, compassionate boundaries with someone who is shape-shifting out of a terror of abandonment.
And, crucially, it is how you learn to show genuine, informed empathy to those who are suffering from the hidden, daily exhaustion of masking.
When you understand the machinery behind the behavior, you can step out of the illusion and interact with the truth.
Which brings us right back to where we started. Next time you are sitting across that small table in a crowded room, next time you feel that instant magical spark with someone who seems to miraculously share every single one of your interests, your deepest quirks, and your untold opinions, I want you to take a breath and ask yourself a question. Have you truly met your serendipitous soulmate? Or have you just met a master of the mirror?
And perhaps more importantly, turn that lens inward.
Exactly. When you catch yourself changing your own behavior, softening your own opinions, altering your own voice to fit seamlessly into a room, who exactly is holding the mirror to you?